And thank you everybody for joining us today. This is our October Lunch and Learn. I am Julie Brown. I'm the Raptor Migration and Programs Director at HMANA, and we are very excited to welcome Hannah Leonard today. She's the Program Director at Sporting Lead Free, and she's going to be talking about the impacts of lead on wildlife, particularly avian species today. She's going to be talking about what's being done to address this threat. So I'm hoping we can learn some ways that we can all help in this effort and get a better understanding of it. I am here today along with longtime board member Carolyn Hoffman, who is currently our board secretary at HMANA. She's also our editor of our journal, Hawk Migration Studies Journal. And a couple things about our program before we get started. This is being recorded. We're also live streaming on our Facebook page. You can view any of our lunch and learns on our Facebook page anytime or on our website. It just takes us usually a week or two to get these presentations up. But on our main page, you can just scroll down to our What's New section and find all our past lunch and learns there. If you need to adjust your display at all to see more of the presentation and less of the people, you can click on the three dots on the upper right corner, and we're disabling, or I will be, the audio and the video for everybody else, and we found that's kind of the best way to reduce distractions during the talk. But even though you are muted, we always love to connect with all of you, so we encourage you to use the chat, ask questions, or make comments. Carolyn's going to be monitoring that chat and can read your question to Hannah at the end. We love hearing where you're joining from, so please feel free to type in where you're coming from, maybe what Hawkwatch you represent. Even if you've seen anything interesting lately at your Hawkwatch. My day was made yesterday when I found a golden eagle, something we don't often see in New Hampshire, so that was very exciting. And if you don't already receive HMANA's e-newsletter, I send that out a couple times a month. You can put in your email address in the chat and I can add you to that list. So with that, I will turn it over to Carolyn to introduce Hannah.
Well, as Julie has said, Hannah is program director of Sporting Lead Free, which is a non-political educational initiative that works to reduce inadvertent lead consumption by wildlife and people through the voluntary choice of lead-free ammunition and tackle. Hannah's first connection to lead-free sporting came when she encountered a leaded golden eagle while hunting with a family friend in southwest Montana. And this experience ignited in her a desire to educate others in the use of non-lead alternatives when hunting. So that's it. And Hannah, you can take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. And please let me know at any time if I cut out or freeze. Who knows with our winter conditions here in Montana, if that'll happen. But thank you all for having me. I'm very excited to present this topic to you all today. So as Caroline and Julie both said, I work for Sporting Lead Free, and our main focus is bringing awareness to this issue of lead impacts to wildlife and humans through our sporting activities. So let's see, make sure these transitions work. So at Sporting Lead Free, we talk about three big components in our sporting world, which includes big game hunting, which will also nest varmint hunting in that, fishing, whether it's spin fishing or fly fishing, and then upland hunting. So any of these sporting activities that introduce lead into wildlife, we talk about that and alternatives that we can bring to the space to educate hunters and anglers about that. So for those of you who aren't maybe familiar with how sporting activities are exposing wildlife to lead, I'll walk you through these lead exposure pathways. So for centerfire and rimfire ammunition, so those are your typical hunting rifles, if a hunter shoots a deer or a varmint, displayed here in these little illustrations, if they use a lead bullet, as soon as that lead bullet impacts that animal, it begins to break apart into hundreds, if not thousands, of tiny lead fragments. So these x-rays are of a deer and then of a prairie dog, and those white dots you can see in the x-ray there, those bright white dots, those are actually lead fragments. So typically when a hunter harvests an animal, they leave the guts in the field, which is an awesome resource that hunters provide for our scavenging species like eagles. However, if we leave the gut pile or an unretrieved varmint like a prairie dog out there, it becomes a really tasty, toxic treat for these scavenging species. So eagles, ravens, other scavengers come down and they eat on these gut piles. They're these unretrieved game, and they ingest lead, which then can result in lead poisoning. From upland hunting, which is typically using a shotgun, and a shotgun has hundreds of little BBs that get shot towards, a game species. We talk about two different pathways to exposure to lead there. So hunters maybe are not always successful in, bringing down their target game, or their dog maybe doesn't retrieve it. So the first one we talk about is crippled birds. So that means, a shot pellet went into that game bird, but maybe it didn't have a lethal shot, or the bird or the dog couldn't retrieve the bird. So now that game bird is flying around, maybe injured, and has a lead pellet embedded in them. That makes them easy prey for birds of prey like goshawks, eagles, and other birds of prey. So while they're eating that meal, they're going to unintentionally ingest that lead pellet that was embedded from the hunter. The second way for upland hunters we talk about is grit pickers. It's not a scientific term by any means, but if we are familiar with backyard chickens, we have seen them pick up grit off the ground. So game birds do that same thing, picking up grit such as pebbles, sand, and stones that aids in their digestion. It helps their gizzard kind of grind their food down. Game birds don't know the difference between spent lead shot and pebbles used for grit. So again, they're going to pick that spent shot up off the ground from our hunting activities. They themselves are going to get lead poisoning, which then again makes them easy prey for raptors to feed upon. This bottom picture here is of a bald eagle with a pheasant, and this X-ray is of a bald eagle that has those lead pellets in its stomach. So a lot of people think that X-ray image is because the eagle was shot. If you shoot an animal with lead pellets like that, it's really, really hard to get that kind of density. So we know that this X-ray image of these lead pellets was from that bird ingesting an animal that had been shot with lead pellets from shotgun shooting. And then in fishing, our first one is just broken tackle. A lot of times we'll snag the bottom of a waterway, or maybe our knots aren't tied super well in fishing. Water birds such as swans and ducks, they dive down similar to, our grit pickers. They pick up grit off the bottom and food off the bottom of our waterways. They're not going to know the difference between a weight split shot made of lead or a lost jig head also made of lead. They're going to ingest that and get lead poisoning. The second way in tackle is what we call swim away tackle. And again, that's, you have that trophy trout on the end of your line and it snaps. And now that trout or bass is swimming around with a nice piece of jewelry in it. However, birds like loons or bald eagles and osprey, they're going to grab that fish up and they're not going to notice if there's that piece of, a hook with lead in it, or again, split shot weights. They're going to ingest it, sometimes whole, and they can get lead poisoning that way. So those are the things that we talk about when we're talking about sporting activities exposing our wildlife, our unintended non-target species to lead. So this issue is huge. It's estimated that over 130 species of animals are affected by lead. I'm going to focus on our avian species, but there are studies that have been done which include amphibians, mammals, us as well as humans. We're all impacted by lead. And there's an estimate that 20 million animals die from lead poisoning or the effects of lead poisoning every year, which is a lot. So lead distribution. If I'm a hunter and I am a hunter, but if I were to shoot a lead bullet at an animal and I didn't retrieve it in the field, there's on average 551 visible fragments in the entire carcass. So that's a lot of fragments out there in that whole carcass. If I gut the animal out, leave the guts in the field, there's on average 160 visible lead fragments in the gut pile. And I say visible because when this study was done, they had some poor grad student probably sit and look at these x-rays of animals and actually count those fragments that they could see. There's new studies out there now using x-ray technology, MRIs, CAT scans, and using computer technology to actually count those fragments. And it's thousands of tiny, tiny fragments that are left behind. It only takes 20 milligrams of lead to kill an adult bald eagle. You might be thinking, well, I don't really know what 20 milligrams is. 20 milligrams by sight is about the size of a small grain of rice. By weight, it's about the weight of a ladybug. So everyone's had that experience of a ladybug, hopefully landing on them. You don't really feel it, until you see it crawling around. It's pretty weightless. It's really a small amount. So just that amount is enough to kill an adult bald eagle. And thinking about how many of those size pieces can be left behind in a gut pile is pretty substantial. As far as tackle goes, in New Hampshire alone, 48% of loon mortalities were caused by fishing tackle. That study was done between, I believe, 1989 and 2012. And that was determined that that much common loon mortality was directly related to fishing tackle, which is substantial again. On average, there is 0.47 to 16.3 lost sinkers per square meter in high fishing pressure areas. So that's a lot of lost tackle opportunities for these birds to get impacted from. This graph shows you kind of a study that our founder, Brian Bedrosian, did. So I guess I should back up and say, back in the early 2000s, California condors were just, well, even prior to that, I guess in the maybe 80s, and Rob Dominich, you can fill that gap there maybe in the chat. California condors were found out that they were dying from feeding on gut piles of, spent ammunition from hunters in gut piles. And our founder, Brian, was like, I wonder if that same thing is happening to other avian species, such as ravens, bald eagles, and golden eagles. So he actually went to the National Elk Refuge in Jackson Hole, and he captured a bunch of eagles and ravens and tested their blood lead levels throughout the year. And what this graph shows you in that kind of orange column is that during the hunting season, our blood lead levels in golden bald eagles spiked. The following couple of years, he handed out lead-free ammunition to hunters, and the percentage of hunters who were successful with non-lead ammunition, there was that almost exact same decrease in blood lead levels in golden bald eagles. So that to him said, hey, this is what's causing the blood lead level increases using lead ammunition, and we can correlate it directly into the hunting season. And we can also fix this by using lead-free ammunition, which is amazing. So even more recently, there's been a study done using feathers and blood lead levels to estimate lead exposure. So feathers, or I should back up, blood integrates lead exposure over 2 weeks. So testing the blood in an eagle, it'll tell you if their exposure happened within the last 2 weeks. Feathers show you that lead exposure between 2 and 3 months. So the blood is just in that kind of immediate if they've been exposed, whereas the feather, it's that over time. So in this study, 40 wild trap birds were sampled in September and October of 2020 and 21. And it indicated that lead concentrations are higher in blood than in the most recently grown feather, indicating that lead exposure occurred 1 to 2 weeks prior to sampling. So again, this correlates right with hunting season. So in Montana, in Alaska, up into Canada, this is that fall hunting season. So those blood lead levels are showing that kind of peak right in that hunting season, which again is giving us that scientific evidence that this is how they're being exposed. So you might be asking, why are birds so affected? Why are we talking about birds? Well, many raptors, like I said, feed on gut piles as a food source. Again, hunting seasons usually correlate with our migration seasons, which is a great thing, again, that hunters provide this meal for these migrating raptors who maybe are spending so many calories they don't want to necessarily hunt. So they see this gut pile as an awesome free meal. But because birds have extremely acidic digestive systems, as soon as they're eating on a gut pile that has a lead fragment in it, that lead becomes readily absorbed, because when I hold lead in my hand, I might get a little bit of surface absorption, but I'm not going to get a whole bunch, enough to really impact me. As soon as I hit that lead with acid, so a stomach acid, and I'll talk about food acids as well, or marinades, that is when that lead becomes really broken down easily and assimilated into the bloodstream. So that in combination is kind of a perfect storm to have these birds be really impacted from that. That lead is then stored in the liver, brain, bones, and growing feathers. So it isn't something that then just passes through, it gets stored. And any time these birds go through like a stress incident, that kind of gets, that stored lead gets re-released into their bloodstream. We've seen that happen in a lot of rehab situations where they'll bring a bird in, it has a broken wing, it got hit by a car or something, they'll test it, the blood lead level is maybe lower, and then a couple days later they test it again and it's spiked. It's because they're in that stress situation in the rehab environment, and it's releasing more of that stored lead. So what does lead poisoning look like for birds? Clenched talons, weakness, muscle wasting, emaciation, wing droop, blindness, head tremors, green diarrhea, palpitations, seizures, regurgitation, death, and more. This is one of those like horrible commercials where it's like, take this great medication, it'll make you feel great, but we also have all these side effects, right? So it can be any of these things. So in my introduction, Carolyn mentioned that when I was hunting in Montana, I came across a golden eagle that had lead poisoning. At the time, I thought it was electrocuted. It had, its wings were drooped, its talons were clenched. I didn't know any better. Above my head were power lines. I just assumed. When I brought it into the raptor rehab facility here in Montana, they called me back and then said, hey, it has lead poisoning. I was like, what? Tell me more. This is crazy. And, I thought, well, they're not, eating paint off of old barns. They're not, inhaling gasoline from old tractors. This doesn't make sense. And they then explained to me that no, it's coming from gut piles of hunters with using lead ammunition. And for me, that was an immediate switch. And then that's how I got involved with sporting lead free. But now I know that those symptoms are what I experienced. That's very much so lead poisoning. The good-ish news is that there is a treatment for lead poisoning. It's called chelation therapy. It's the same thing us as humans would go through if we had exposure to lead. It's similar to chemotherapy in that they inject this kind of concoction of toxins into the bird's bloodstream, and then that binds with the lead, and then it kind of does the scrubbing mechanism to clean out their blood of that lead. This is intense. Raptors are given this twice a day for 5 days. They get 2 days of rest, and then they repeat it for another 5 days. Most of the time, I would say raptors are not going to make it through that treatment, whether it's because the treatment is too hard on them or because they have other, injuries that brought them in, and that in combination with the chelation treatment is really tough. So although there is that opportunity and we have seen some success in treating these birds, it's pretty tough. The bird that I found, he was so emaciated that he couldn't even go through chelation therapy. He was beyond the point of where he could be saved, which was really unfortunate. So that was a lot of bad news, right? Everyone take a deep breath, be like, oh my gosh, there is really good news out there, right? So that good news is sporting lead free. So as in the introduction, sporting lead free, we're a non-political educational initiative working to reduce inadvertent lead consumption by wildlife and people through the voluntary choice of lead-free ammunition and tackle. So our mission is out here to inform our sporting communities on this issue and making sure that they know that this is a voluntary choice they can make. And, hoping that is where we're going to see this change happen. So we have a 3-pronged approach. Part of that is awareness, which is what I'm doing here and bringing awareness to folks. The second part is community. We have a whole bunch of ways that people can get involved. We have a membership program. We have ambassadors. We have conservation partners. We have an advisory council. So this community building is bringing together sportsmen and women who are saying, hey, I care about this issue. I know about this issue and I want to spread it within my community. There's only so many of me and Brian, our founder, to be out there boots on the ground. And so by having these community members, build that network is super important. We get most of our information as hunters and anglers from our network. And so having people within those communities who care about this issue is really important. The third way is access. So a lot of times it's hard to find or hard to see and differentiate between what has lead in it and what doesn't. So we're working with retailers to help them be educated in this issue and help them have their product more readily displayed so that when consumers come in, they don't have to really think that hard to make that choice of lead-free ammunition and tackle. We also hand out, in Wyoming, we hand out lead-free tackle to Kids Fishing Day, which happens all around the state in June. And that way getting kids started from, day one on using lead-free is a great way to kind of continue that hunting and angling heritage in this conservation-minded way. So we want all of you to use Sporting Lead-Free as a resource as you're talking to your community members. And, whether you're a hunter and angler yourself or you just know somebody, messaging and talking points are really important. So I'll give you some of those in my presentation here in a little bit, but also check out our website where it's full of resources for you to share with your own community and your network. We have outreach materials, we do presentations, and like I said, resources for the community. We have all sorts of tips and tricks on how to switch and then where to find that lead-free ammunition and tackle. So you guys might have seen in recent headlines that language can be really impactful. So we see these headlines of Virginia bald eagles threatened by hunters, lead bullets. Wildlife experts tell hunters this. These really inflammatory headlines, right? And as anyone knows, if you're shamed, think back to your childhood. If you're shamed, you don't feel good about that, right? You're like, oh man, like I'm gonna maybe dig my heels in more, or I'm not gonna really want to make a change just despite people. So these inflammatory headlines are really, really negatively impacting this movement of trying to actually educate hunters and level with them essentially and say, hey, there is actually this really great information out there and this option out there. But doing inflammatory headlines like this that we see, it actually turns them away from this movement. So working on how to change that narrative, instead of saying we should just ban lead, say use lead-free when there's a chance of lead getting into the food web. Instead of saying lead is poisonous, say you're implying a hunter is poisoning their family. We don't want to imply that, right? We need to not start in a conversation of defensiveness and instead provide it as information. Copper, which is the alternative for big game hunting, provides a great clean alternative. Hunters are stuck in their ways and don't care about wildlife. Like I said, many hunters don't know or haven't heard about this or haven't heard the right message about this. Don't assume folks are knowingly choosing lead versus a lead-free alternative. So most folks, when they decide to take hunter ed, which in most states you have to take it if you were born after, I think, like 1985, we don't learn about this topic in hunter ed. We learn about waterfowl hunting. Waterfowl hunting, you can't use lead, and you haven't been able to use lead since 1991, and that's a federal mandate. And that's about where it stops in hunter ed, unless you've had a hunter ed instructor who knows about this issue and then supplements the curriculum that way. But otherwise, unless you have, your hunting mentor knows about this, you have a hunter ed instructor who knows about this, most folks out there hunting, this isn't a topic that they're very familiar with. We've had experience at Sporting Lead-Free where we've talked to hunting organizations about this, and they've never heard about this issue before. So even people whose lifeblood is hunting, not knowing about this issue. So again, going in with, that understanding that most people don't know about this. And that's why I have a job. I hope I don't have a job in 5 years. I hope everyone knows about this. But right now, that's where we are. So you might have caught on that Sporting Lead-Free believes in education, not regulation or legislation. And I want to explain why. So firstly, it's really difficult to enforce. This picture here shows one of these is a lead bullet and one of these is a copper bullet. Most lead bullets for hunting are copper jacketed, which means that there's a copper jacket around a lead core. So when a game warden or a conservation officer stops somebody and checks their ammunition, it is extremely difficult to tell the difference once that bullet is out of the box. In California, they have banned all lead for hunting, but they're having a really, really, really hard time with compliance. So they banned it for California condors to save them, but they're still finding that California condors are dying from lead poisoning. And that's because it's really hard to enforce it. People, when they're told what to do, like I said, they dig their heels in. A lot of people in California don't know why they were told to do this. They don't know about the condor issue. They also don't have the resources on how to switch. They don't understand that. So making sure that that education is a part of it wasn't necessarily done in California. And so they're kind of reaping the negative side of that. There's manufacturing challenges. So manufacturing a lead bullet is very different than manufacturing a copper bullet. Most ammunition out there is made for defense and not for hunting. So when you're asking all of these manufacturers to fully change over to lead-free alternatives, that's not the majority of their market. And so understanding that and understanding that, lead can still be produced, just not when it's going to hit the food web. So understanding that we don't want to, no pun intended, shoot ourselves in the foot by making enemies out of our manufacturers. There's also these knee-jerk reactions that lead to legislation that actually works against the solution. So a lot of legislators are now saying, oh, well, we want to do a ban on bans because because people are trying to push legislation to ban lead. Now there's legislation that's pushed to ban bans, which is just crazy. So again, that works against this initiative, this educational approach. We want to educate folks on making the choice, that voluntary choice. And most of the time when people are educated about this, they immediately switch. So some quick talking point do's and don'ts. Again, start with education. Be pro-lead and not anti-lead. I say that because right now there is a place for people who have maybe stockpiled a bunch of lead. Go to the range. When you're shooting at an official shooting range, most of those ranges have to have a lead mitigation plan in place, which means, every 10 or 20 years, they scoop up all the big mounds and they sift out all the lead and they send them off to be recycled into car batteries. When I shoot trap with my dad on Sundays, I use lead. It's not entering the food web. A lot of these, anti-lead, talking points are again, making this issue harder for sportsmen and women to really digest this. So if we come at it in a pro-lead free, not anti-lead way, that's a way to, again, keep that conversation mellow and keep it, understandable. Create a conversation, not a lecture. I know I'm lecturing to everyone right now, but if you create a conversation and you find that common ground, most everybody has similar values at the end of the day, whether you care about wildlife, your family, or your heritage within the hunting and angling culture. Something is going to pull at somebody's heartstrings. So having that conversation with them, finding out where their values lie as a hunter and angler, and then talking to them, curating your talk based on that conversation. And like I just said, finding common ground, whether it's wildlife health, human health, or performance. And then share this message with your network. Again, it doesn't ever hurt to bring awareness to issues, especially one that is human caused and human solvable. So the don'ts: start in a defensive position. Again, shame people for not knowing. Like I said, most people aren't going to learn about this unless they've had, the benefit of learning from someone in their community. Don't get frustrated. Not everyone's going to change. I have a lot of friends that, even though they know this is my job, they're still on the fence about it. I'm not going to get mad at them to their face, But I'm just, every time I have an interaction with them, I'm going to try a little bit more. I'm going to try a different approach. I'm going to continue bringing it up, and eventually I'm going to wear them down. But not everyone's going to change, and we know that. But the cool thing about this is every one person that changes makes a huge effect on our wildlife, our non-target species, our avian species, which is super empowering. Don't claim to know everything. We have a ton of resources to help you. I get asked a lot about ballistics, and I know enough to be dangerous, but I don't know everything. And I will absolutely make that known when I'm having a conversation with somebody who I know knows what they're talking about. So like anything, don't claim to know it all, but claim to know where you have some great resources to help. So what can all of you do to help in this initiative? So we have a membership program, and that helps us show our grantors that, hey, people care about this, and this is a contingency of folks that want to see this movement continue. Talk to your friends and family and neighbors about this issue and how they can get involved. We're active on social media. If you have the means, please feel free to donate. Again, we're a nonprofit. We're working on this initiative, and every penny counts. And then find lead-free ammo and tackle and ask your retailers to carry it. A lot of this is going to be consumer driven. When you go and look at the shelves, you might not see lead-free ammunition and tackle right now, but if you go and you get a whole bunch of friends to individually go and ask your retailers to carry it, there's going to be some power there in the consumer power. So like I said, our website full of resources. Learn more, reach out. I'm always available to answer questions or help you navigate conversations or even find ammunition and tackle. So with that, I'll end on that, and I'm here to answer any and all questions.
A question. One thing I hear, Hannah, from hunters is that the lead-free shot is not as strong as the lead shot, and that they're more likely to cripple an animal with the lead-free than the lead shot. Can you speak to that at all?
Absolutely. So just like anything in our lives, technology improves with time. And in the shot discussion in particular, so I'll rewind it back to the 90s when for waterfowl hunting, you could no longer use lead. The only alternative at the time was steel. And when folks moved to steel, not only did a lot of them have to get a whole new shotgun because you can't shoot steel out of old shotguns, but they weren't understanding that steel as a metal is a very different makeup than lead. And so they weren't using the tool properly. So they were crippling birds. They weren't having that much effectiveness. However, real quick, they learned, they said, oh, okay, I have to constrict my choke selection. And the choke selection is the end of your shotgun. It helps create that pattern, whether it's big or small. And they also had to increase their shot size for steel. So those kind of little tips and tricks and understanding the alternatives and how to use them is really important. You know, that saying, don't bring a knife to a gunfight. That same kind of saying exists in choosing an alternative. So a lot of the folks who, you know, maybe complain about performance, maybe they're not matching their firearm with their ammunition correctly, or they're not picking the right tool for the job. So again, our website has resources on how to switch, on those little tips and tricks on going from lead to steel. Bismuth is a great alternative for upland and waterfowl hunting. There's a great company called Boss, B-O-S-S. They're a copper-plated bismuth. They're one of our conservation partners, and they're only direct to consumer, which means they can control the price. So those alternatives are just good to know about, and also knowing how to pair those alternatives with your firearm.
Okay, thank you. Another question is from Marion Soul, who wants to know, do copper bullets fit all guns? And she has a second question. Is there a big difference in cost between lead and copper ammo?
Great questions. So I'll start with the cost one. So yes and no, and it depends, right? So with anything, there's, you know, your lower level and then your higher premium level product. So for big game ammunition, centerfire ammunition, if you're switching from kind of that lower level lead ammunition, say a Remington Core Lock bullet, to a lead-free bullet, a copper bullet, you're probably going to be spending $10 to $20 more a box. That's $1 to $2 more around. If you're switching from a premium lead bullet to a copper bullet, you might actually end up saving money. So it really depends on where you're switching from. What I always tell people with that, that cost analysis is that this is the one thing that's touching your animal. Your camo isn't touching the animal, your, super cool new vest, whatever it is. You should be investing in the thing that's actually taking your animal and having an effect on the rest of the environment. So we want, a one shot, one kill kind of mentality. So for me, when I started switching, I was a poor grad student and I did it because I wanted to invest in what I was doing. So when people talk about the cost, yes, it's a factor. However, now, when you see ammunition on the shelves, we're actually finding a lot of ammunition that's lead-free is less expensive, even from the lower end lead ammunition. And then as far as fitting into your different firearms, most common calibers of firearms there's a lead-free alternative available. If you're kind of in the newer calibers that are coming out, there might not be as much choice or as much availability in that caliber. But the thing to note is that every firearm shoots every ammunition a little different. So just like our shoes, my foot really likes Nikes, it doesn't. And somebody else's foot might really like Adidas. And so knowing what your rifle likes and what groups best in your rifle is really important. And that's going to change, between lead and copper, and even between copper and copper.
Thank you. And Steve Hoffman wants to know, what do you know about the ballistics of lead versus lead-free ammo?
Yes, ballistics, love it. So ballistically in your typical hunting range, so sub 600 yards, they're ballistically going to behave the same. Again, the important thing to know is the nuances between lead and copper. Because lead is really dense and copper is less dense, in order to get the same grain weight, copper bullets had to be longer. That might affect the way that your bullet behaves downrange. So a little tip and trick is when you're switching to copper, actually reduce your grain weight, and that's going to behave a lot more similarly to your lead bullet downrange as far as your accuracy goes. As far as your, terminal ballistics, your wound channel creation, your hydrostatic shock, all of that is dang near the same between lead and copper. It's going to depend again on what brand you're comparing it between. We have a ton of studies on our website that do those scientific analyses of, their hydrostatic shock, their wound channel, their penetration. And so that between lead and copper in those ethical hunting ranges is dang near the same. I will say a previous downside to copper is that past 600 yards, it had difficulty expanding reliably. Just like our cell phones in the 80s, they were terrible and now they're great. Technology improves. So we're seeing bullet manufacturers actually improving their technology to, be in that market of these long range hunters. So there's a guy in California, McGuire Ballistics, who is manufacturing bullets that are expanding reliably at 1,200 yards. I will never be shooting something that far, but there is a contingency of hunters who do that, and they now can't use that argument either.
Okay, thanks. And from Julie, we want to know, what is the reach of your organization, and are there any other organizations that do this kind of education work around the continent?
Yeah, so we have I believe we're over 500 members now, which is awesome. We're only 3 years old. And so we're still new. We have a great social media following. So although we're small, we're powerful. We also have other organizations out there who are doing similar work. So you might be familiar with the North American Non-Lead Partnership. They do an approach that's more top down. So their focus is talking to state agencies. So your state game and fish offices, to make those agencies aware and kind of have that top down approach, whereas we're that bottom up, we're that grassroots individual way to get involved. So our organizations work together to kind of meet in the middle and really enforce this message. There's also other organizations. There's Ventura in California. I'm going to butcher their name, but they have a lead-free outreach program. There's lead-free Minnesota. So there's all these kind of organizations. We're all working together. We all know each other. And that's again, what it takes is that community and that support with everyone working together to get this job done.
Thanks. And from Judith Thurber, she wants to know where you got the vest in the picture.
In this picture?
I guess, yes.
Okay. That jacket in this picture is from Costco.
Oh, okay.
This vest that I'm wearing right now is a Patagonia vest. I'm not sure which one she's talking about.
I'm not either. So. And that's all the questions I had here.
Great.
Okay, well, great. Thank you so much, Hannah. That was a lot of great information. I definitely learned a lot. I'm impressed by everything you're doing as a small organization. We can relate to that as HMANA being a small organization doing a lot, but that really was excellent. And I applaud you on all this great work you're doing. It's not easy, I'm sure, but we're grateful for all that you're doing. We are for Lunch and Learns coming up. We have one in November. If any of you would like to take part in that, we're going to be hearing from Dave Brandis, and he is the chair of the Integrative Engineering Program at Lafayette College. And he's active with our Raptor Population Index and also the Eastern Golden Eagle Working Group. So he's going to give a talk titled Winds of Change in Pennsylvania's Woods. And he's going to be addressing the changing weather patterns that many Hawkwatch sites are reporting across the monitoring network. So he will be investigating whether wind conditions in the fall are indeed changing, and if so, what that could mean to hawk migration and population monitoring with hawk counts. So that's a hot topic for sure. We're hearing from a lot of Hawkwatch sites that they are seeing different weather patterns with, climate change and a lot of changes and what that means for raptor migration monitoring. So we really appreciate everybody joining today. Again, thank you to Hannah for taking the time and for the work you do. I should mention that Dave Brandis, this talk in November, we don't have the registration set up yet, but we will very soon. You can do that through our website or Facebook page. It's going to be November 15th on another Wednesday at noon. And in closing, we hope you will consider showing your support for HMANA. We have our support page web address up here. And it supports all the great programming we do, including things like this Lunch and Learn series. And you can join our kettle, become a member. And membership's just a really great way to help raptors and to help us support Migration Monitoring Network and all the great work that they're doing. So thank you again, everybody, for joining. And to you, Hannah. And we hope we see everybody again next month. And have a good rest of your day.